The Fable Archive, Record VII, Case File, The Skin That Shines, Primary Subject, The Emperor, Designation, Luminescent Sovereign, Secondary Subject, Unseen Tailors, Classification unclear, Presence detected via reflective anomalies. Status: Record surface shows increased gloss, reflections observed, acting independently of subjects. Archivist warning: avoid direct eye contact with any depiction of the Emperor. Reflection retention risk high. Welcome to Twilight Fables. In the forgotten corridors of the archive where old tales linger like stains that never quite dry, the account of the Emperor of Radiant Hall is among the most difficult to preserve. Pages warp, ink gleams where it should dull. Even now, the surface of this record shines faintly, as though remembering the man at its center, a man who desired to be seen above all else and was devoured by his own reflection. This is his story. One continuous, unbroken chain, recorded in a single breath so the gloss cannot seep too deeply into the margins. The kingdom of Radiant Hall was not always radiant, though it pretended with fervor that it was. Once, it had been a quiet place of modest courtyards and cool stone dwellings, a region known for its patient artisans and soft-tongued scholars. But all that changed when a new emperor rose, young, ambitious, and convinced that the world saw him as something unfinished. He inherited a throne of burnished gold, yet he believed none looked at him long enough, deeply enough, reverently enough. He hungered for eyes upon him the way others hungered for breath. Whenever he passed, he strained to capture every flicker of attention, wondering which gaze wavered, which blink dared to interrupt admiration. The palace staff whispered that he inspected his reflection more than he inspected the realm. Servants learned to polish every surface, windows, goblets, and marble floors, so his face could bloom upon them like a feverish flower. They learned as well to keep their own eyes rooted to the ground lest he catch from them some hint of disappointment, or worse, apathy. Even a fleeting glance poorly timed could earn dismissal. The emperor did not tolerate inattentiveness. His court, once a place of lively conversation, choked beneath the need to praise him. Poets who once wrote of forests and constellations now composed endless odes to his posture, his complexion, the delicate arch of his wrist. Musicians tailored melodies that rose and fell in a way that echoed his stride. Painters no longer dared portray shadows near him. They feared he might interpret them as blemishes. Over time, the emperor grew certain that admiration was a fragile substance. It had to be maintained, cultivated, renewed constantly. The slightest sign that his glow was fading would be disastrous. Yet the dread that he was not admired enough burrowed into him, gnawing with quiet teeth. It was during this anxious era that the travelers arrived. No one saw them enter the city gates, no one greeted them or housed them. All that was known is that one morning, the emperor's advisor, a thin man known for his careful breathing, approached the throne trembling. "Your Radiance," he said, "there are tailors in the city who claim to weave cloth unlike any other." The emperor barely glanced at him. "Many make such claims," he murmured, examining his reflection in the polished arm of his throne. "What makes these different?" "They say," the advisor whispered, leaning in as though afraid the surfaces around them might overhear, "their garments can only be seen by the wise, the enlightened, those worthy of your presence." The emperor's reflection gleamed back at him, glossier than before. "Only the worthy," he repeated, tasting the words. "Then at last my court will be revealed to me." The advisor opened his mouth to speak further, but something shimmered at the edge of the room. A faint ripple in the reflection of the marble floor, like a figure stepping into the hall, though no one walked through the doors. The emperor straightened. Across the room, the gleam coalesced into the outline of two shapes, thin, tall, impossible to measure properly. They looked like men only insofar as their silhouettes suggested human proportions, but their edges flickered, bending slightly as though the air could not decide where they actually stood. They bowed in perfect sync. "Your Majesty," the first figure said, though his mouth did not move. The sound arrived from the reflective surfaces instead, from mirrors, cups, polished columns, as though the entire room spoke for him. "We have heard of your longing." "Your brilliance," the second finished, voice overlapping like a delayed echo. The emperor rose, fascinated. The tailors, if they were tailors, glided rather than stepped. Every reflection showed them differently, some mirror panes rendering them as dark silhouettes, others showing nothing at all. The emperor approached slowly, compelled by the pull of their presence. "You claim you can create a garment worthy of my reign," he said. "More than worthy," murmured the first tailor, though his reflection smiled while the figure itself did not. "A garment that reveals truth." "A garment that shows who deserves to look upon you," added the second. "A garment made of light itself." The emperor felt something warm coil in his chest. Light. Only the worthy would see his magnificence fully. Only the enlightened would perceive his form. The fools, the liars, the unworthy, oh, they would be exposed. He approved the commission at once. The tailors requested an isolated studio, one with many mirrors. The emperor granted them the grand hall of reflection, a place previously used for ceremonies, but long abandoned because no one enjoyed witnessing their own likeness multiplied 100-fold. It suited the tailors perfectly. For weeks they toiled, though no one could quite describe what they were doing. They brought no thread, no fabric, no tools. They carried no satchels, no looms. Servants who crept near swore they only moved their hands through the air, fingertips bending beams of light as though sculpting something invisible. Yet the servants insisted something else worked beside them, a presence that only the mirrors saw, a drifting shape that never crossed the floor in the physical world, but glided freely through reflective surfaces, watching them, assisting them. One servant claimed the reflections had started speaking to one another when no one else did. Another reported that her reflection blinked a moment after she did, as though lagging behind. All of them grew paler by the day. The emperor, meanwhile, visited often. Each time the tailors praised his wisdom, his refinement, his sublime capacity to perceive what others could not. They urged him to examine the growing garment. "Do you see how it glows?" they would say, air shimmering between their hands. "Do you see how it drapes with the softness of moonlight?" The emperor nodded, pretending he saw, but nothing was visible. Still, he convinced himself that the fabric existed, that his eyes simply were not yet attuned to its full splendor. With each visit, the reflections in the hall became harder to trust. Sometimes his reflection moved a heartbeat out of sync. Sometimes it smiled too long, or tilted its head when he hadn't. Yet the emperor dismissed the unease. After all, he reasoned, enlightenment was a process. Perhaps reflections needed time to adjust, too. At last, the tailors announced the garment complete. The emperor stood before them in the grand hall of reflection, the countless mirrors surrounding him like an audience waiting with held breath. The tailors lifted nothing, yet the air shimmered around their hands as though supporting weight. "Your Majesty," they said together, "your new attire." They gestured for him to approach. He stepped forward. Two phantom hands brushed the air along his shoulders, his waist, his arms. They tugged gently, adjusting nothing at all. Yet everywhere their invisible fingers touched, his skin warmed. It felt like sunlight spilled across him, soaking into his flesh. The tailors stepped back. "Behold," they whispered, "behold your shining form." The emperor stared down at himself. He saw only his own skin, bare, vulnerable, untouched. But around him, the mirrors rippled. His reflections gleamed faintly. At first he thought it a trick of the candlelight, a glint on polished stone. But as he watched, his reflected skin brightened. It glowed like pearls soaked in moonlit dew. Then, brighter. The reflection shimmered with an unnatural luster, as though light came from beneath the skin rather than upon it. "Exquisite," breathed one tailor. "Radiant," sighed the other. The emperor swallowed. I see it," he whispered. He didn't, not truly, but his reflections did, and that was enough. When he stepped outside, the court gasped. Ministers and nobles stared at him, faces pale, unsure of what they were seeing. No one dared admit they saw no clothing. No one dared question the shine that trembled faintly beneath the emperor's bare skin. Those who hesitated were marked as fools, unworthy, unenlightened. The emperor saw their fear and mistook it for awe. Rumors spread that his new garment shimmered like dawn. Poets whispered that his form now reflected truth itself. Music in the palace changed. Mirrors were polished daily until every surface gleamed. Yet the strangest change was within the reflections. They no longer followed the movements of the living. Some lingered. Some turned their heads independently. Some watched the emperor walk away long after his physical body left the room. The emperor's own reflection grew the boldest. It smiled more, its shine brighter, its movements delayed or accelerated as it pleased. When the emperor approached a mirror, his reflection stared back hungrily. One night, wandering the palace halls, he heard voices whispering through the polished stone. Not the voices of servants, not the tailors. They were softer, sliding along the surface like fingertips. "You shine," they murmured. "You shine so brightly." He pressed his hand to a column. His reflection did the same, but its fingers splayed wider, stretching unnaturally. Something inside the mirror seemed to strain forward, eager. The emperor whispered, "Who are you?" His reflection smiled with every tooth visible. "You," it whispered, "the truer you." The emperor stepped back, heart pounding, but everywhere he turned a reflection waited. Windows gleamed, vases shimmered, even the floor flickered with faint versions of himself, each glowing more intensely than the last. Servants began avoiding him entirely, not because they saw him as nude, but because the reflections reached for them when they passed, clawing the polished floors with glistening fingers before sinking back into the surface. At court gatherings, reflections draped behind each person like obedient shadows, moving not with the bodies that cast them, but toward the emperor. "Your Majesty," the advisor whispered one morning, trembling violently, "perhaps you should stop wearing the garments." "You cannot see them," the emperor said with cruel delight. "You admit your unworthiness." "No, your radiance, please, the reflections." But it was too late. The reflections now shone brighter than the emperor himself. Wherever he walked, they followed, sometimes walking ahead, sometimes lingering behind. Sometimes they spoke softly. "Shine with us. Come with us. You belong on this side, and worst of all, you are most radiant when dissolved." The emperor commanded the tailors to return. They came instantly, as though stepping out from the polished air itself. "Why do they follow me?" he demanded. "Why do they speak?" The tailors inclined their heads. "They see your brilliance, your Majesty," one said. "They long to be near it," murmured the other. "Do you not wish to join your truest self?" asked a voice from the mirrors, a voice that sounded like the emperor, but smoother, eager, sharpened. The emperor stumbled back. The reflections came forward. Dozens of gleaming versions of himself pressed their palms against their side of the mirror, each shining brighter than the last. The tailors stepped aside. Their forms blurred until they were nothing but tall distortions of light. "Your garment is incomplete," they whispered. "You have worn the image. Now you must wear the truth." The reflections pressed harder. Glass trembled. The luster beneath their skin grew blinding. "Come," they said. "Come shine with us." The emperor screamed as the mirrors split. But from here, the record becomes unstable. Ink transforms into sheen, words sliding into bright streaks. The rest must be reconstructed carefully, through archivist notes and recovered fragments from the corrupted surfaces. What became of the emperor cannot be stated with certainty, but reflections across the palace remain too bright, too hungry, too synchronized. Something lingers, something still shines. The palace was sealed after the mirrors shattered, though sealed is not quite the right word. More accurately, the staff fled, leaving doors barred, draped, or abandoned, each person praying that the reflective surfaces inside would remain dormant without eyes to provoke them. Yet something still moved behind those corridors, something that hummed faintly like distant glass singing. The emperor's absence left the throne vacant, but no one dared to claim it, for whoever sat upon it found their reflection twisting violently behind them, bending into shapes that did not match their posture. Ministers resigned, courtiers vanished, servants left behind whispered only one thing: the emperor's body was never recovered. In their stories, he had been swallowed by the reflections, pulled like fabric through a seam. But rumors in Radiant Hall never stayed still for long. Some claimed he fled, ashamed of his noble attire. Others believed he wandered the palace still, invisible to the eye but casting no shadow. A few, those who dared peer into still water or into the polished casing of a lantern, swore they saw him staring back at them, glowing faintly beneath the skin. The archive obtained the record only when the palace was formally abandoned decades later, long after vines began claiming the gates and dust settled where courtiers once praised their sovereign. The archivists sent to investigate the ruins were forbidden from carrying polished tools. The only light permitted was lantern flame, which flickered too chaotically to form clean reflections. The reason for such caution is evident in the surviving fragments they salvaged: bits of glass that pulsed with memory, strips of reflective metal that twitched when handled, and most disturbingly, thin transparency-like sheets upon which impressions of the Emperor's glowing skin seemed stamped. These artifacts now sit in sealed drawers, monitored by a rotation of watchers who ensure no reflection lingers too long on any surface nearby. What truly happened inside the palace after the Emperor's disappearance comes from the personal accounts of the last archivist who dared to enter, record keeper Thalin, who vanished shortly after submitting his final notes. His words are preserved here, translated where the edges have shined into illegibility. He records that upon entering the grand hall of reflection, now largely shattered, the remaining mirror fragments behaved strangely. They did not lie inert upon the floor. They quivered, rearranged themselves subtly. As Thalin wrote, they pointed, like compass needles seeking a true north that lay somewhere deeper within the palace. Against protocol, he followed. Beneath the hall was a lower chamber, previously designated as storage for ceremonial garments. According to Thalin's notes, the door was locked from the outside, yet when he touched the handle, it felt warm, as though someone inside had recently breathed upon it. He forced the door open. Light flickered, his lantern flame stretching unnaturally long, bending across the floor, reaching toward something that gleamed faintly in the darkness. At first, he believed it a body lying curled in the center of the room, but as he stepped closer, he saw it was only skin, skin without a body, skin that shined softly in the dark. It was not dead, Thalin wrote. It pulsed like an echo. The skin was intact, every fold, every curve recognizable as human, yet it lay collapsed like a garment shed hastily. The archivist tried not to breathe too loudly. He described the shine emanating from it as internal, a slow radiance, like a dim star breathing. The glow intensified when he approached. Against his better judgment, he stretched a hand toward it, but halted inches away as the air thickened with a faint pressure, a strange sensation like someone pushing lightly back. The skin twitched, only once, but enough to send him stumbling away. It was not discarded, his next note reads, but waiting. He fled the chamber and attempted to reseal it, but the shine seeped beneath the door's frame like a thin mist of light. This alone would have been unsettling enough, but Thalin's account did not end there. He noted that as he ascended the stairs past the shattered hall, the mirror fragments began sliding across the floor. He thought at first the motion came from the draft his footsteps created, but soon the shards arranged themselves into a rough oval, forming a crude reflective surface. Despite their jagged edges, their center shimmered, a new reflection taking shape where none should. His lantern dimmed. The reflection inside the shard oval flickered, the silhouette unmistakable. The Emperor, or what Thalin thought was the Emperor. The figure inside the shards was brighter than any candle, its skin glowing with the same unnatural luster described in the earlier records. Its face was expressionless, eyes too luminous to read. The archivist stiffened. The reflection slowly lifted its hand. The shards trembled. Thalin dropped the lantern. Flames scattered across the floor, not enough to start a blaze, but enough to crack several shards. The reflection inside them rippled like disturbed water, and with a sound like glass inhaling, the image vanished. Thalin did not return to the hall. He fled deeper into the palace, believing the broken mirrors would weaken their ability to manifest. He was wrong. Shadows clung to the walls, and every faintly shiny surface, lacquered wood, polished stone, even the faint gleam on the metal clasps of his satchel, responded to him. They brightened as he passed. They hummed softly. They watched. "I understand now," he wrote in a margin blotched with sheen. The garment the Emperor believed he wore was never meant to clothe him. It was meant to reveal him, to peel him. They wanted his shine. They wanted his reflection. They wanted the part of him that wished most desperately to be seen. Thalin's final full entry described the ballroom of Radiant Hall, a massive chamber with chandeliers that once dripped crystal like frozen rain. The crystals were gone now, but the brass frames remained polished, untouched by dust. Too polished, as though tended, as though licked clean by light. The reflections in the metal rippled when he entered. Then the air shimmered, the ballroom darkened, though no clouds moved across the skies above. Thalin stood frozen as the chandelier's metal frames twisted, forming elongated shapes that mirrored outlines of arms, shoulders, heads. Figures emerged, not from the shadows but from the reflections on the curved metal surfaces, dozens of them. They unfurled like liquid silhouettes, their forms folding outward until they hovered inches above the floor. Their skin shone with the same dim yet potent glow as the Emperor's reflection. They watched Thalin with hollow faces, smooth and gleaming like unblemished porcelain. No mouths, no noses, only eyes, if they could be called eyes, small nodes of concentrated shine. They were reflections, Thalin wrote, but not mine. Not the Emperor's, not entirely. They were offspring, born of his desire to be witnessed. The figures tilted their heads in jagged synchrony, their shine intensified. One reached out, not physically, but its glow extended like a filament of light, brushing the archivist's arm. Where it touched, his sleeve darkened, as though devoured by shadow or bleached of meaning. He recoiled, stumbling back. More filaments extended from the figures, brushing the air like searching antennae. Thalin realized they were not reaching for him, they were searching for his reflection. He dropped to the ground, trying to hide his face from the polished surfaces, but the ballroom floor was too smooth. His reflection sprawled beneath him, faint but visible. The creatures noticed. They drifted closer. Their shine sharpened. They began pulling, the archivist wrote. Not my body, my reflection. I saw it stretching beneath me like fabric. It screamed without sound. In desperation, Thalin extinguished his lantern and tore his cloak from his shoulders, flinging it across the floor. The cloth, though dusty, dulled the reflective surface enough to break their focus. The creatures recoiled, their shine dimming, their bodies rippling with irritation. His notes describe a frantic escape across the ballroom as he sought any surface dull enough to shield him from his own reflection. When he finally reached the far door, the reflection creatures melted back into the chandeliers, their bodies sliding into the curved metal with horrific grace. Their shine lingered. It pulsed faintly, like a heartbeat. Thalin fled through the corridors, seeking an exit, but the palace twisted around him. Hallways doubled back, doorways led to rooms that should not connect, and at every intersection, faint reflections flickered along the walls, guiding him somewhere deeper, not outward. They wanted me to go down, he wrote with trembling script, to the chamber where the skin lies. His next entry is barely legible, the ink distorted by the glossy residue that plagued the record. The skin was standing. Thalin described the skin as no longer collapsed on the floor. Instead, it had taken shape, empty yet upright, as though worn by an unseen frame. The glow from within it pulsed steadily. He wrote that it sensed him. The skin turned toward him, though it possessed no eyes. Its shine brightened, illuminating the chamber. Behind the skin, the reflections on the walls flickered, and the Emperor's silhouette appeared among them, taller, more radiant than before. Thalin wrote that the reflections were not copies, but conduits, windows through which something enormous and luminous peered. The Emperor's voice came through the reflections, layered and faint. I am seen. The skin stepped forward. Light rose from its surface, forming thin filaments like the ones Thalin had witnessed in the ballroom. They reached toward him. He tried to run, but the reflections ahead warped, bending into barriers that forced him back. The skin drew closer. Thalin's notes devolve into slashes of ink, words squeezed between streaks of gloss. One sentence survives clearly. It wants to be worn. The archivist dropped his quill there. What became of him afterward is unknown. When retrieval teams entered the palace months later, they found no trace of him. Only one thing remained in that chamber, a faint outline of a human shape etched into the floor, shimmering with dull light, and beside it, a single reflective sheet upon which an impression of Thalin's face shone faintly, his eyes wide and gleaming as though lit from within. That sheet is now sealed in drawer 77C. It is not to be opened. Reflections around it have begun reacting to movement again, and the shine is growing brighter, pulsing faintly, as though something on the other side is waiting to be acknowledged. The final phase of the Emperor's tale begins not within the palace but outside it, specifically in the restless city of Radiant Hall, where whispers persisted like dust that refused to settle. Even after decades of abandonment, citizens avoided the palace gates, claiming the air shimmered unnaturally near the iron bars, as though faint reflections drifted across the metal despite the lack of polish. Children dared one another to touch the gates, swearing that faint silhouettes flickered along the rusted spires. Merchants refused to display glassware near the palace district, complaining that reflections behaved wrong, bending slightly toward the palace instead of mirroring the marketplace around them. As years passed, the city began to forget the emperor as a man. He became a myth, a shimmering phantom, a luminescent curse, a cautionary tale. But myths have weight in the archive. Myths leave residue. And when enough residue gathers, archivists must intervene. The final chain of events began when residual shine spread beyond the palace entirely. Archivist Rain, a researcher assigned to monitor dormant anomalies, documented the first incident, a small puddle after rainfall that held a reflection brighter than the sky above it, a reflection with eyes that did not belong to the person standing over it. Shortly after, multiple metallic objects in the city, cutlery, door hinges, belt buckles, began exhibiting moments of gleam drift, where reflected forms stuttered or slid out of sync. Some reflections smiled independently. Others whispered softly. Others simply stared. The people panicked, and the archive dispatched a containment team led by senior archivist Velen, one of the most experienced in reflective anomalies. His mandate? Enter the palace, identify the source of the expanding shine, and neutralize it before Radiant Hall succumbed to the same fate as the Emperor. The team consisted of 7 archivists: Velen, Marrow, Istra, Kef, Dalen, Vera, and Loon. They entered through the main gate under clouded skies, clouds chosen intentionally to eliminate direct sunlight, which might empower reflections. They carried matte tools, cloth soaked in dust to dull surfaces, and lanterns shielded by soot-blackened glass. Valen insisted on strict formation, every archivist trained to monitor their own reflections. But despite their preparations, the palace interior greeted them with a soft wave of glossy air, an emanation of light too dim to illuminate, but too bright to ignore. It seemed to breathe. Every archivist felt it. Their notes, later recovered, describe an immediate awareness of being watched. They moved through the crumbling hallways, past the ballroom of Radiant Hall, where the chandelier frames still glinted faintly, though they had long since tarnished. The team avoided looking directly at them. Something within their curves shimmered like half-formed limbs. When the archivists reached the grand hall of reflection, Velen ordered the group to slow their lanterns and reduce light. The hall was still littered with shards, though many were now fused together in unsettling patterns, forming branching veins of fractured mirrors that pulsed faintly like living tissue. Velen examined these patterns while Marrow documented their configurations. One fused arrangement resembled a spine, another a rib cage, a third a face, elongated, smooth, and lit from beneath. Istra, standing closest to the face-shaped arrangement, whispered that her reflection inside the shards blinked slower than she did. Velen pulled her back immediately. "We cannot afford synchronization loss," he warned. "Not here." They proceeded toward the lower chamber. With each step downward, the air glowed slightly brighter. Velen noted that this glow did not behave like light from any natural source. It did not cast shadows, nor did it reflect off the walls. It existed independently, clinging to the archivist's skin like fine dust. At the base of the stairs, the team found the chamber sealed exactly as described in Thalen's notes. But unlike before, the glow seeped not just beneath the door, but through it, shining faintly through the wood as though it were porous. When Velen touched the handle, it felt warm, too warm for a room untouched for decades. He ordered 2 archivists to stand guard while the others prepared containment cloths. The moment the door opened, their lantern flames trembled in fear. The chamber beyond was vast, larger than any map indicated. The walls curved outward unnaturally, forming a bowl-like shape coated not with stone, but with a smooth, reflective surface that pulsed softly like heart tissue. In the center stood the skin, upright, luminous, empty yet undeniably alive, but it was not alone. Surrounding it were dozens of shapes, reflections of reflections, layered forms without substance, each shimmering faintly as though trying to solidify. Some possessed partial faces, others had limbs that bent at wrong angles, others were flat silhouettes rippling like ribbons suspended in water. As the archivists entered, every figure turned toward them despite lacking proper eyes. Velen ordered the team not to make eye contact, not even with their own reflections. But in a chamber where the walls themselves gleamed like mirrors, there was no true escape. The skin pulsed brighter, its glow unfolding into thin filaments of light that extended toward the newcomers. Valen felt a tug at his reflection, a gentle but persistent pull. He covered the reflective floor with his cloth, diminishing the effect. Others attempted the same, but the chamber was too large. The cloths covered only small patches, leaving many surfaces perfectly reflective. The filaments stretched farther. Valen shouted for formation retreat, but the moment the archivists began moving, the walls shifted, not physically, but visually. The reflections along their surfaces bent inward, forming illusions of doorways that led nowhere. Kef attempted to run toward one and collided with the curved wall, dazed. His reflection lingered behind him for several seconds before snapping back into alignment, trembling violently like a living thing resisting control. The skin stepped forward. It made no sound, yet a vibrating hum filled the chamber, resonating through every archivist's bones. Valen realized too late. The skin was no longer waiting to be worn. It sought to wear something instead. The shine intensified, illuminating the room until every reflection bled into overlapping layers. The archivists could no longer tell which reflections were their own. Valen attempted a command, but the shine absorbed his voice, echoing it back through the chamber as a warped murmur. The skin approached Lune first, perhaps because Lune stood closest, perhaps because something in her reflection called to it. Filaments wrapped around her shadow on the floor. Her shadow rose. Not her body, her shadow. It peeled from the ground like fabric being lifted by invisible fingers. Lune screamed soundlessly as her shadow stretched, twisted, and merged with the skin's glow, dissolving into it like ink in water. Lune collapsed. Her body remained intact, but her eyes shone faintly from within, as though something behind them pressed forward. Valen dragged her back, but her reflection remained where she had once stood, still, vacant, yet glowing faintly. Vera shouted that her reflection was moving independently. Dalen's reflection had no face. Marrow's reflection turned its head when she didn't. The chamber hummed louder. The skin turned toward Valen. He felt the pull grow stronger, not toward his flesh, but toward his reflection. Valen dropped his lantern, smashing it deliberately. The floor dimmed, breaking several reflections. The skin recoiled slightly, its glow flickering. Istra seized the moment and hurled her cloth across a large reflective section of the wall, dimming it. The reflections inside twisted with frustration. The archivists attempted to dull more surfaces, but filaments of light snaked across the room, lifting their cloths away as though the chamber itself rejected them. Valen realized the chamber was more alive than the figures within. It had been shaped by years, decades, of reflected hunger. The Emperor's desire to be seen had seeped into the stone, rewriting the architecture until the building no longer obeyed the world outside. Valen shouted for the team to scatter, searching for the true center of the shine, the point where the anomaly anchored itself. Through the blinding light, he saw it. Not the skin, but something behind it. A reflection of the Emperor, taller than he had ever been, face featureless yet unmistakably his silhouette. The reflection did not mimic the skin's movements. It did not mimic the archivists. It stood perfectly still, hands raised as though holding invisible threads. Valen realized the reflection controlled the skin, not the other way around. The skin was merely the garment. The reflection was the wearer. The luminescent sovereign had transcended mirrors. He had become a reflection of pure desire. The reflection stepped forward, its features warping fluidly across the reflective wall behind it, as though sliding down a vertical surface of liquid glass. A voice spoke, not from the reflection, not from the skin, but from every reflective inch of the chamber. "I am seen." Valen dropped to his knees, covering his eyes. Around him, archivists screamed as their reflections were pulled upward, stretching like sheets caught in wind. Shadows merged with shine, faces distorted, bodies trembled as though tugged by puppeteer strings. Valen forced himself to look only at the matte floor beneath him, searching desperately for something, anything. Wasn't reflective. His hand brushed a crack in the stone, a flaw, a tiny imperfection unclaimed by shine. Valen pressed his palm into it and felt the floor's pulse weaken beneath his touch. He shouted, "Find the flaws! Break the surface!" The archivists, disoriented, attempted to obey. Istra smashed her elbow into the nearest shining wall. Cracks splintered outward. The The glow flickered. Marrow emptied her satchel, scattering dull powder across the floor, dimming several reflections. Dallin, though struggling with his faceless reflection, found a fissure in the corner and wedged his lantern frame into it, forcing the crack wider. The skin shuddered. The filaments retracted. The Emperor's reflection snarled, not through sound, but through a violent ripple that distorted all nearby reflections. The shine dimmed further. The archivists worked desperately to find more flaws, more imperfections in the room's reflective surfaces. With every crack widened, the chamber darkened. The reflection's power waned. The skin trembled violently, collapsing inward like deflating fabric, its glow shrinking into thin lines. But the reflection fought back. It surged across the walls, attempting to smooth the cracks, sealing them with fresh shine. Velan realized breaking the surfaces wasn't enough. They needed to disrupt the anchor entirely. He crawled toward the center, where the largest reflective panel displayed the Emperor's towering silhouette. The panel trembled, resisting him. Its shine pulsed, pushing back. Velan pressed both hands against it. The reflection looked down at him, featureless yet full of intent. Velan whispered through gritted teeth, "I refuse to see you." The chamber screamed. All reflections shuddered violently. The Emperor's silhouette distorted, its limbs stretching, its torso bending unnaturally. Velan pushed harder, feeling the panel crack beneath his palms. Light poured from the fractures like bloodless wounds. The other archivists joined him, each placing their hands upon the panel, pressing, pushing, breaking. The reflection convulsed. The skin collapsed entirely, dissolving into dust-like shine that scattered into the cracks. A final pulse of blinding light erupted from the panel, knocking every archivist to the floor. When the light faded, the reflection was gone. The shine drained from the chamber. The walls dulled. The filaments evaporated. Silence replaced the hum. Velan rose slowly, checking the others. Loon remained unconscious, but alive. The faceless reflection behind Dallin had vanished. Marrow's reflection breathed in sync once more. Velan approached the center panel, now dark and cracked. In its surface he saw only one thing, his own reflection, dim and mortal. But just as he turned away, something shifted in the corner of his vision. Not a figure, not a shine. A ripple. A faint, nearly invisible tremor in the reflective dust on the floor, as if something beneath it inhaled softly. Velan did not linger. The archivists escaped the palace, sealing it with mat boards thick enough to extinguish all reflections. The city breathed easier in the following weeks as reflections returned to normal and the gleam drift diminished. But the archive's final note on the record acknowledges the truth. Reflections cannot be destroyed, only redirected. The Emperor became something without edges, without flesh, unconstrained by mirrors yet bound to the concept of being seen. And as long as reflective surfaces exist anywhere in the world, even faintly, even scratched, even dull, there remains the possibility of shimmer at the edge of sight. Archivists monitoring Drawer 77C report occasional glimmers even in total darkness. Some claim the shine pulses like a heartbeat. Others swear they hear a whisper crawling through the metal, "I am still seen." Whether it is a warning or a promise remains unknown, but the archive watches, and the reflections watch back.
Thank you for joining us in the world of Twilight Fables. If you enjoyed this tale and want to hear more stories like this, please subscribe and hit the notification bell for more.